somebody had told us that ahead of time, and ironically, when I was in Tampa, they were one room over and nobody ever connected us, because it just wasn't considered important, but now it was, especially as they heard that, the mountains were, 20,000 feet and that the weather was horrible and all these things. And so we tell them what we can do. And he goes, well, you guys are going to start doing a UW campaign, which is unconventional warfare. That's where you link up individual operational detachments or ODAs up with factions of the Northern Alliance, which were the allies that we were trying to coordinate with. So it went from there.
So, and I'm glad you brought up the 20,000 feet thing, because I had it in my notes. I wanted to ask you, in the movie, it's depicted that helicopters had never flown that high, and they weren't sure whether or not it could be done. Was that how it actually worked in real life, that you guys didn't know if the altitude was even workable?
Yes and no, but not for the reasons that you might think. So helicopters had flown that high. Chinook helicopters routinely fly at 25,000 feet in Alaska, right over the mountains there. They do the rescue mission at the top of that. That was at Mount McKinley, I think. And so it is possible, but using carrying a usable load, going the distance that we need to go as far as, because we had to trade off fuel for cargo, if you will, people.
Right.
And so the math didn't work out, and we're wearing supplemental oxygen, or how long is that going to last, per console for the people you got on board. So there's a lot of calculations that have to go into this that, really weren't operationally proven. I mean, I operated in Colorado all the time, but that's nothing compared to Afghanistan.
We were just like you. We binged the hell out of Tiger King.
Oh, yeah. That was peak pandemic quarantine level binging.
It's so,
bizarre
yet awful, yet great.
Very well produced.
Yes. Carol Baskin, though, just bothers me. And the whole nonchalant attitude about her husband, Don, he gone missing age, 59?
Yeah.
He would be 84 years old today. And she's claiming that the Department of Homeland Security contacted her and said that he's alive after all this. Now, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, if you call them and ask, is there, can you please, can we verify that her account is true? They say no. No one's told them any different on the missing person, but he's legally dead. And it's because they had no trace of him for 5 years. And of course,
so right now it's just Carol Baskin saying that Homeland Security contacted her?
And Big Cat Animal Rescue, yeah. Yeah.
Are we buying this?
No.
Okay.
No, but that's the headline now.
I didn't read the story
with the
enough,
update.
but I just saw the headline and everyone reacting to it. So I assumed that it was Homeland Security announcing he was alive in Costa Rica. But now that I know it's just Carol Baskin claiming that Homeland Security told her that he's alive, I don't think I'm buying it. Now, if you were married to Carol Baskin, though, Costa Rica sounds great. To get away, just completely fake your own death and disappear and into Central America. That's not a bad route to go if you're married to Carol Baskin.
Well, so there's some interview with ITV, the This Morning talk show on ITV, where she alleged that her husband, who was legally declared legally dead in 2002, was found alive, and she points to in this interview being contacted in a letter from the Department of Homeland Security. But it's been over a year since she did this interview, and it's just now coming to light that she had been claiming that he was found alive. The whole thing is bizarre.
It's a story that we're going to monitor here on OutKick 360, and we'll have any updates for you with our sources within Homeland Security. We'll reach out to them and see what we can find out.
I mean, the whole thing.
I want a statistic on
the claim, that she fed him to the tigers and all that.
I want a statistic on people who have successfully faked their own deaths that we know about. Because I'm guessing 40-50% we never find out about. If you're truly successful in faking your own death and you don't want to be found, you just kind of exist as a ghost, without a home, and you go somewhere and disappear into that area. But how many people actually pull it off that's been documented?
That would be a great series.
This is the Netflix series that I want every episode, Hutton, to be a different person that successfully pulled off faking their own death. I'd watch that series, that anthology series.
I wonder what Joe thinks about all this, too, by the way.
I'm sure someone can get a camera somewhere around him, and he'll talk about it.
Headlines when we return, including Greg Roman. He's out as the Ravens offensive coordinator.
College football's in trouble. There's a lot of people trying to keep it from happening.
I think it's a general consensus across the college football landscape. We want to play football.
College football is a huge part of the fall. It's a huge part of Americana itself.
It just really felt like people in the country needed college football to just feel a little sense of normal.
Well, big news from the Big Ten as the conference releasing its 10-game football schedule.
We go home thinking that we're going to be practicing the next day. Everybody gets a text, stay home, everything's canceled.
Big Ten fall football season has been canceled.
We just believe collectively there's too much uncertainty.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, though, Kevin, is that was the same position you had 6 days ago.
The Big Ten is an unmitigated disaster.
There was a ton of confusion. There was presidents saying one thing, there was coaches saying another.
Players had to be silent, coaches had to be silent, ADs had to be silent.
People said, how does what you just did make any sense?
And nobody really knew what the heck happened when they voted to cancel the season.
You make this huge historical announcement, and then Kevin Warren never does a press conference to explain it. It was like a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis.
The word really that was lacking in all of this is transparency.
It felt like a lot of stuff was happening behind closed doors.
Even today, we still don't know what occurred.
So you don't tell us parents, that's fine, but you're not telling the young men that it affects.
We have to make a decision to save the season. What about the history books? What about the rivalry games? What about Paul Bunyan's axe? How is that not going to go to a team this year?
This is a failure of epic magnitude. The Big Ten presidents and leaders should be held accountable for the disastrous decisions that they're making.
Then the commissioner doubles down, saying his decision will not be revisited.
And that's the point. It felt like a war was declared on the Big Ten and Kevin Warren.
Everything turned political.
Because if this is medical, then you would have stopped the game of football a long time ago.
I think the Big Ten leaders will tell you that they probably made a mistake in hindsight.
If I had the chance to do it all over last year, I would make the same decisions that we made.
Armando Salguero will join us in 20 minutes. We'll dive deeper into the big NFL headlines and preview the top games for Saturday and Sunday. The divisional round kicks off Saturday with Jacksonville and KC.
So close, Hutton. We're so close.
I know.
To the weekend. So close.
4 really good games, too.
This week has felt excruciatingly long.
You think so?
Yes. I feel like today should be Saturday, not just Friday. I feel like we should be watching divisional playoff games right now. As we sit here, I feel like the game should have just kicked off in the late afternoon on Saturday. That's where I feel like we should be this week.
Greg Roman is out as the offensive coordinator in Baltimore after 4 seasons. A stint that included Lamar Jackson winning MVP and seeing some great things come about through an offense that was built around their quarterback. And now the question is, with Roman stepping down, and he says he's on to do other things. It doesn't specifically say if he's going to immediately get back into coaching. My guess is yes. But his statement was, after visiting with Coach Harbaugh and huddling with my family, I've decided now's the right time to move on from the Ravens so that I can explore new challenges and opportunities. Chad, this immediately brings up, well, what does this mean for Lamar Jackson? And at a presser, the end of season presser that teams have where you've got the GM and head coach available, both Eric DeCosta, the general manager in Baltimore, and John Harbaugh said that not only do they want Lamar back, they are eager. DeCosta says we're eager to get contract talks and extensions going again where they left off from the preseason. Of course, the speculation was whenever he didn't travel with the team to Cincinnati that we were seeing the split happen right before our eyes. And turns out that they're just pointing to the injury, and they're saying, yeah, we want Lamar here, and Lamar wants to be here based on conversations they've had with him. Well, we'll find out, because I think this takes another turn towards demands that Lamar, who represents himself, is going to make versus what the organization is going to be willing to put up. And based on availability, Chad, the last 2 years that you've pointed to, it's not going to be what Lamar Jackson wants in terms of the guaranteed money.
It's hard to jump to a conclusion. Normally with a story like this, we're going to get to another one where you can immediately kind of draw a quick knee-jerk conclusion to, okay, this happening signifies this is coming next, or that this might be a problem. Bruce Arians out in Tampa a year ago immediately was, well, Tom Brady must not get along with Bruce Arians, and now he's out, and he likes someone else better, so he's going to be the guy. Greg Roman being out with the Ravens, given the Lamar Jackson situation and the fact that he's now a free agent, Hutton, I can't really draw a quick conclusion to that because I don't know what Lamar Jackson, what he thinks about Greg Roman. I know they've worked together for a while. I know they've had a lot of success together as a duo, but without knowing what their personal relationship is like, whether or not Lamar Jackson thinks that Greg Roman's holding him back or the offense back, I don't know all those factors. So I guess initially you could say, well, this doesn't probably look great for him coming back to Baltimore, given the guy that the last 4 years has been his OC is not there. But I don't know because I don't know what Lamar Jackson thinks about Greg Roman. I do get every indication based on comments and everything else that the whole didn't travel with the team and all this is overblown and that the Ravens absolutely want Lamar Jackson back.
And the thing, so in 2019, Greg Roman's offense averaged 33 points per game. It dropped to about 22 this past season, and it's declined every year. But some of that decline has to be attributed to, I think much of it, either Lamar Jackson being injured, which we've seen the last 2 years over the final 5 games of the regular season, and the fact, Chad, that they traded away their offensive talent that wasn't in the backfield. They've loaded up at tight end. They're very good in that area, but they trade away the stars that would have made this offense far more explosive on the outside.
Hollywood Brown.
But then
who else am I missing?
But they
got rid of?
They haven't truly invested in that, and they were never able to complement what they were doing so well with the run game, on top of exploring more options in the pass game. And you know, some of that people point to, well, Lamar Jackson's not good in that area. Whenever they would let it rip, I mean, he was putting up some pretty big passing numbers in stretches within that offense itself.
I would also say it's really tough to just be excellent at everything. I mean, they have an excellent rushing attack with Jackson and Dobbins and what they can do in the run game. They've got an excellent tight end in Mark Andrews. I can't point to many teams across the league that they're not somewhat deficient in one facet of their offense, even with the great passing. I mean, I look at Buffalo. They don't have great running backs, or a great running game when it comes to just handing the ball off. Even the great teams in the NFL are deficient in one thing. So I get what you're saying, and they certainly haven't done enough to help him on the outside with what they've lost. But I don't know many teams that can do everything that well.
The Bucs offense didn't do much well at all. Could not run it. Worst run offense in the NFL this past season. Byron Leftwich, despite that, had the highest rate of first down runs of any offensive coordinator, among the highest, I should say, where he would put Tampa's offense in a really bad position from the jump. You're facing second and long. Leftwich is out, officially fired. Speculation whenever we started the week was he was going to be out whenever we came back on Tuesday. They did not make that official through the organization until today. But at this time last year, he was one of the hot coaching candidates, including in Jacksonville, where they ultimately end up with Doug Peterson. But Leftwich was discussing, let's see, Jacksonville, New Orleans.
Didn't he take his name out of Jacksonville?
Well, he wanted to bring certain people, like it was the general manager discussion. He wanted certain people to come with him. And I believe it was Adrian Wilson, if I'm not mistaken, from Arizona, which is where Leftwich got his coaching start with Arians before going to Tampa. And I don't think anyone's surprised by this. I am surprised of how quickly he fell off the radar as a head coaching commodity, now just looking for another opportunity to join another staff.
It's crazy how quickly that fell apart. From the hottest head coaching candidate to reports that he's being picky about an NFL head coaching job to a year later, that offense completely crashing and burning, and him now out of a job with the Bucs. I think he's going to get hired somewhere else quickly. I don't think he's going to have a hard time finding a job in the NFL. But it is crazy to think about. I felt like a year ago when all the Bruce Arians stuff happened, it was, oh, well, maybe this is Tom Brady making a play for his guy, Byron Leftwich, to, oh, no, a year later after one more season, Byron Leftwich is going to be fired. Didn't see that coming. If anything, I thought it'd be Byron Leftwich taking Todd Bowles' job after 1 year, if there was going to be some swap that happened.
And now we wait. There's some discussion about who the next OC will be in Tampa. I believe Todd Monken has been mentioned there already.
Good. Get him out of the SEC.
Yeah.
Get him out of college football.
Yeah.
I think everyone that's a fan of anyone not named Georgia is rooting for any type of coaching staff upheaval there, because that is a well-oiled machine that is going nowhere anytime soon. And I brought that up about their continuity. Will Muschamp on defense, and then 64-year-old Monken on offense, that you don't think he's going to leave to be a head coach anytime soon. Maybe this is an opportunity to get back in the NFL.
Trevor Lawrence doesn't think that Arrowhead is going to be much louder than Jacksonville was last week. But this story out of KC, where Lawrence has made the comments about Arrowhead, if you actually read through everything that he was saying, you can pull one quote and say, I can't imagine Arrowhead will be much louder. What he goes on to make statements that reaffirm that Arrowhead is among the loudest stadiums in the NFL, and it is going to present a massive challenge. But, Chad, this is the classic case of a fan base and a team, and I would do this too if I were them, stirring up their fans to try to prove a point that much more this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a great compliment to his own fans in Jacksonville. You know, whenever anything happens like this with a comparison, I don't overreact too much, because it's just a good opportunity for Trevor Lawrence to act like, man, it was loud in Jacksonville last week. I don't think it's going to be much louder. Our fans are great. I can't imagine a situation being much louder. Now, if Trevor Lawrence came out and said, I don't think Arrowhead in the playoffs is going to be any different than Houston during the regular season. Now, that is a diss.
Yeah, we've been on the road before.
That is bulletin board ready. That is headline ready. That is flat out disrespectful of Trevor Lawrence. I don't think this is anything to get worked up over simply because he's comparing the visitors to his own home stadium.
Obviously, the environment and atmosphere we're going to play in is one of, if not the best in the NFL. That's how he starts the quote. And then he goes on to say, I can't imagine it's going to be much louder than our fans were here on Saturday, honestly, but that was when we were on defense, not offense. We played there earlier in the year, but this is a little bit different. It's a playoff game, divisional round, so the stakes are higher. So I expect them to be even crazier, more packed stadium. That's the quote. That's good. Exactly.
This is great selective quote taking to
by,
fire up a team or a fan base a little bit.
Yeah.
That's a good job to cut that off after there. Cut off the preface to it with, boy, this is one of the best atmospheres in all of football, but it's not going to be much different than our home. But also, I was on offense when that was happening. I mean, they really chopped off a lot of that quote with Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence doesn't strike me as a dude that's ever going to completely step on his own comments.
Yeah.
You know, he's very good about knowing what to say.
By the way,
I don't think he's ever going to find himself in a controversy.
I went to all but 3 NFL stadiums, and KC, I have not been to Seattle. KC was by far the loudest NFL stadium that I was on the sidelines for.
And it was
by far
freezing. I feel like every time you've been there, it is below zero.
7 or 8 times, and it's always extremely cold, or we're there for the preseason. But it was loud for preseason games there. I mean, that's the most college-like atmosphere in the NFL. Kansas City fans.
I think I put Buffalo up there.
Buffalo
I've not been to KC as a fan. I've been there in the media area, the press box, so it's hard to compare the two. I will say, just having been, you're right, though, it's very collegiate because it's just an enormous parking lot. It's almost like you're on a college campus.
Mm-hmm.
In Buffalo, though, I'll always say it's the most collegiate of environments because you're literally on a college campus.
Well,
they back up to a junior college.
And the tailgating.
And there's trees around, and there's huge parking lots all around. The tailgate deal is a big deal. It's very small. You know, there's no skyline around you when you're in Buffalo. Same goes for KC because you're so far from downtown. But it's similar but different. I would say I'd give a slight edge to Buffalo being a little bit more of a college environment, but Kansas City is spectacular too.
The underrated stadium, at least for me, was Ford Field in Detroit. No one talks about how loud that place gets. And I was there whenever both teams sucked on that given Sunday. And it was extremely loud.
Now imagine Detroit next year if they actually get off to a good start for once. What if the Lions are 5-1 to start the year after the finish they just had, and that place will be rocking? You want to talk about a starving fan base? We saw this in Cleveland when Baker Mayfield got them a playoff win, and they were suddenly relevant again. That was a fun place. I didn't go to any games there, but just to watch a game on television in Cleveland was a blast with the crowd noise and the desperation from the fan base, the hunger. You're going to see that with Detroit if they're any good next year.
Chargers head coach Brandon Staley kept his job. He says he never felt his job was in jeopardy. Chad, I take that to mean that confirms the reports that they weren't going to fire him based on the monetary issues going on within the organization, not having the funds to jump out, pay the staff, and then also pay the new incoming coach top dollar. The speculation was Sean Payton. Staley says his job was never in jeopardy. It will be if they run it back the same way that they did this year and, make the playoffs but lose out in that fashion.
I wish a coach, it's happened very few times in history, I wish a coach would just acknowledge.
Hot seat.
I'm on the hot seat this year. Like, just say it. I love this team. I love this locker room. We got to deliver. It's on me first. I'm the head coach. Just put that pressure on you. It doesn't matter what you say or don't say. If they're not good next year or they don't win a playoff game, he's probably getting fired a year from now. So just say it. Just go ahead and put that pressure on you and take some of it off your team. I'd respect the heck out of that. If a coach just flat out open the season saying, this year is my year. I'm on the hot seat going into this year. We got to win and win big
Playoff
this season.
or pink slip for me this year.
Just say it. I mean, I think that would serve as a great motivator for your team. If it's true that all these guys love him and Justin Herbert went to bat for him and other leaders on the team, Austin Eckler, if that's the case, lay it all out there. This is it for me this year. This is the one. It's a hot seat year, and I have so much faith in this team and what we're doing this offseason and what we're going to do this year that I'm not worried about it. We're going to go out there and we're going to play our best. I also laughed when he was asked if he felt like he was outcoached by Doug Peterson, and he kind of said, "Well, I don't think I was outcoached in the first half."
In the first half. In the second half, yes.
True. Yeah.
Coming up,
tale of two halves. This game of football.
We'll get Armando Salguero's response to what we just discussed with Brandon Staley. We'll also preview the matchups for this coming weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And Chad,
Hutton, I can't be asked to coach well two halves of football.
Just one.
Let's just put that out. I don't know what you guys expect from me as the head coach, but it's coaching that well for two halves is not going to happen very often.
And with Greg Roman out in Baltimore, what does that mean for Lamar? Armando weighs in next on OutKick 360.
As we move past the college football regular season, the postseason, and the playoff championship game, is there, are we going to see, in your opinion, are we going to see the same storyline going into next year, you think, with the same teams? And I'm talking, okay, Bama, Georgia, two teams that are looking for a new quarterback, by the way, in Bama and Georgia. Ohio State is as well. Michigan's going to return J.J. McCarthy. Harbaugh, this NFL nonsense saga comes to an end for another year yesterday. Do you think it's trending towards where, okay, with the playoff expansion coming up too, okay, we got our 4 or 5 teams. You know what I mean? Maybe Clemson gets back in there. There's a few other. But do you feel like Kirby Smart has set himself up now where he's running a dynasty at Alabama? At Georgia, along with Nick Saban trying to run his own dynasty at Alabama.
Yeah, I think that was probably the takeaway that everybody had. Every podcast that I listened to after the game, every column that I read, and certainly what I wrote and what I said on my own show, I think we're there, man. And, I think what stands out is, one, it goes like, I think it's easy. And I was one of the people that was critical of Kirby Smart pre-national championship game last year, but they've been elite for about 5-6 years now. I looked up the stat. I can't remember it. I think it was since that title game run in 2018, outside of the COVID year, I think they've won at least 11 games every year. Now, they couldn't get over the hump, and part of it was they ran into really good teams. They ran into a historically great LSU team in 2019. 2018, they obviously had Bama on the ropes in the SEC title game. And so now they're there, but they're there with the confidence of knowing that they can beat anybody in college football. And so it is kind of amazing. They went in an 18-month span from the team that you expected to find a way to lose the big game to now, I think they're the best big game team in college football. I mean, you look at their season, what were their best performances? The national championship game, a season opener against Oregon when we all still had questions of all the talent that they lost, the Tennessee game when Tennessee came in number 1 in the country. And so I think we're there. And then I would also add, from the I would also say being there. And one of the reasons I was so excited this game was in LA, because I host radio on Saturdays. I don't get to cover a lot of games during the season. Just to be around Kirby Smart, to be around those players, I think that standard has been set. And Kirby said it himself. He's like, the biggest thing for us right now is complacency, because we have a chance to be really good again next year as well. So I think they go into next year. I think they should be the favorite. Every sports book I've seen, they are the favorite. But I do think there's some other interesting storylines now that Jim Harbaugh is back with J.J. McCarthy, as you said, for one more year. I think this could be it. He's never going to say it publicly, but he's got his quarterback. Ohio State's young, games at home against Ohio State. And then, like you said, moving parts at Ohio State, Alabama, Penn State's interesting with maybe a quarterback upgrade, even though they lose Sean Clifford. So I'm excited already about the narratives. But yeah, if you told me on the day of selection Sunday that Georgia's the number 1 seed, 13-0 off an SEC championship, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all next December.
Aaron, we've talked about this before. When's the Harbaugh mess just come to an end? I know you just said next year, but man, we cover this sport and we hear things and we hear stuff coming out of the NFL and we hear Harbaugh's interest, and he has interest. Look, if there was a job that was really offering him, and I mean a set in stone offer to leave, I think he would not be the coach at Michigan right now.
I'm not a big fan of Brandon Staley. I think Brandon Staley eventually will show us and will show us that some guys were meant to be coordinators and some guys are meant to be head coaches. He's got a long way to go before we can say that he's meant to be a head coach.
OutKick 360 rolls on. That's Armando Salguero from last week as we were previewing the Los Angeles Chargers matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. We know how that game ended up at 31-30. And we say hello to Armando Salguero, OutKick.com's NFL writer.
Shot caller.
Well done there. And I can't wait to go ahead and go straight to Vegas with your next proclamation, Armando. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm going to go get in my car now and take a victory lap. A vroom, Brandon Staley does Brandon Staley. Guys, it's not hard to tell you who people are in the head coaching business. And when they are who we think they are, we see what happens in games like the Jaguars and obviously the Los Angeles Chargers. Terrible. Just awful.
Armando, based on Staley saying, when he was asked if he was outcoached by Peterson, he said, certainly wasn't outcoached in the first half. Based on a guy saying that, I doubt he's going to do this, but we just got done talking about this. I'd love it if Brandon Staley just came out before next season and said, you know what? I am on the hot seat. This is a huge year for me. We need to improve. We need to win big this year, and I'm confident in this team, and we're going to go out and do it. You have nothing to lose because you're going to get fired if you don't meet expectations anyways a year from now. So just saying it's not going to change anything, I would really respect a coach that came out and said that before a season.
Right. I'd also respect a coach who just blew a 27-point lead.
Yes.
And would put it on himself.
Yep.
Because he is a defensive coach. And yet his comments after that game were kind of looking towards what the offense didn't do in the second half. And lo and behold, they fired their offensive coordinator. What? Are you kidding me? Dude, your defense that was very good in the first half was very terrible in the second half. And yeah, you had 3 interceptions in the first half. You gave up 4 touchdown passes in the second half. So a little, staring into the mirror perhaps is called for. A little introspection. I'm not a fan. I'm just not a fan.
Armando Salguero with us on OutKick 360. Wink Martindale left Baltimore last year. Today we learned that Greg Roman is leaving as offensive coordinator this year. What do you make of Roman's departure, Armando, and how does it tie into Lamar Jackson and the negotiations moving forward?
Right. It's interesting what Harbaugh has done the last couple of years with his coordinators, because both of them, are very accomplished. They're outstanding. And we know that Martindale has never really been on the head coach hiring carousel, but that guy is amazing. And the New York Giants defense, which lacks cornerbacks that anyone is afraid of, the secondary is kind of mix and match. And yet here they are in the divisional round of the playoffs, and they're just great. They did a very good job against Kirk Cousins the other day. Greg Roman was given a quarterback 3 years ago, that was not a very good quarterback. He was basically a run, type of quarterback that a lot of teams thought needed to be a wide receiver. And he turned him into an MVP candidate and a stud. And someone who is asking for a contract that is 100% guaranteed and worth over $250 million, $250 million is what Lamar Jackson wants. And the reason he can want that and no one scoffs is because Greg Roman helped to develop him. And the fact that now the Baltimore Ravens have decided, we've got the greatest run game scheme in the NFL, and the guy who schemed it up shouldn't be here. I don't understand that at all. Look, this year the Ravens, they struggled early in the year on defense. They gave up a lot of leads. They blew some games because of those leads. I would say to you, Wink Martindale's defense in Baltimore wouldn't have done that. So the same way they had growing pains this year after losing Martindale, they're going to have growing pains on offense next year after losing Roman.
Which one seed has the better chance of coming out a bit sluggish this weekend? Is it Philly or Kansas City?
Yeah, so obviously both of them been off 14 days now when they play. Look, I just have very high regard and respect for Andy Reid. I also love the fact that he has a play in the playbook where the playmakers are in a circle and they go and they
that was
twirl
awesome.
around. like, how can you not love this dude? And, their quarterback does acrobatic things with passes. I think I'm going to go with the Philadelphia Eagles maybe are more likely to stumble and bumble early on if they're going to do that this weekend, more likely than definitely the Kansas City Chiefs.
Let's flip that a little bit, and I'll ask you, with both number 1 seeds and their opponent, which of the two opponents is most likely to come out and play great and either win or give that number 1 seed a fight for their life in this game between the Giants and the Jags?
Well, the Giants already gave the Eagles kind of a fight the final game of the season, and the Giants weren't playing all of their players. The Giants were already, locked into making the playoffs. The Eagles were as well, but they played their starters. The Giants didn't early on, and it was a close game. And so one assumes that once the Giants get all their guys on there and in there, and we're going back to coaching, right? Brian Daboll, I think I shared this last week. He was the guy that I voted for Coach of the Year. I have a lot of respect for him. He's done more with less than most. And I just think that the Giants, what they did in Minnesota last week, what they've done all season long, which has been improbable and oftentimes surprising, you just, after a while, it's not a surprise that they show up and they play hard and they don't make mistakes and they're disciplined and they're hard to beat. So I'm going to expect that from the New York Giants.
Cincinnati invested quite a bit in the offensive line, Armando, and they improved greatly. The problem now is they're down 3 of their starters as they go to Buffalo this week, and they've got offensive line issues and questions. Buffalo does not have Von Miller, and how do you think that matchup goes? Who do you favor, given the fact that we've seen Joe Burrow win with a lot less in front of him?
So I was at the Bills versus Bengals game that was ultimately canceled. And at the start of that game, the Bengals were they were tearing up the Bills. It gets forgotten basically because of what happened next, which was Demar Hamlin collapse of a cardiac arrest. But up until that moment happened, there was a clear better team in that game, and it was the Bengals. Having said that, as you bring up, the offensive line is not full go. It's not 2/3 full go, 2/5 full go. The Bengals with Joe Burrow, their bad offensive line last year, they were in the Super Bowl. So they're back to the same situation. Okay. Joe Burrow knows how to handle that situation. And I'm not saying it's optimal, because obviously it isn't. But I get the feeling that they feel like they can manage these issues. And with Jonah Williams, I'm not sure that it's permanent. So if they continue to advance, we'll see him again, is my understanding, no?
Yeah, I would think so. And Armando, it's interesting. You're there covering this story with Demar Hamlin. You were there the night it happened. You were there throughout the week. You were there for the Bills' next game. And we're all sort of learning as we go with all this. But unless I've missed it, I haven't heard any reports or any information coming from doctors or Demar Hamlin's camp or the Bills' camp on what exactly happened. We've heard about his status. We've heard about him back in the facility and everything else, but I don't know if anyone's asking the question anymore. We had doctors on speculating about what it could have been or probably was, but we haven't heard any update on what exactly happened that night to Demar Hamlin.
Well, it was asked, but doctors are not at liberty to divulge the medical information of their patients unless the patients explicitly allow them to do so. And Demar Hamlin, who is obviously allowed to divulge his medical information, hasn't spoken. And so until someone who has permission, or Hamlin himself or one of his family members decides to go there, we're kind of in a lurch. I know that there's a lot of theories out there of what it is. Let's just say this. Demar Hamlin is 24 years old, okay? And he had a physical at the combine. He's had all the players get physicals at the beginning of the year. They are all able to go to the trainers anytime that they have any sort of issue whatsoever. And this came out of the blue. That's not normal. Okay. As you guys probably know, I had a heart attack in 2020, but I'm not 24 years old and a prime of his life, super athletic, in shape athlete, as quite the opposite, right? Go ahead, say it. Quite the opposite.
You're saying it, Armando. I'm not going to say it for you. You're saying it. You're saying it.
So there were reasons that what happened to me happened, and bacon had a lot to do with that, and spaghetti had a lot to do with that, and looking at the treadmill and ignoring it for years on end had a lot to do with that. This guy is not that. So it's just stunning that it would happen to him. I think that's part of the story, obviously. But until he talks about it, I doubt anyone else will.
Should this game be on a neutral field? That's being discussed, given that we didn't see the matchup finish. They didn't midway through the first quarter. Was that an option for the league, or was it specifically to the AFC Championship game only?
It was specific to the AFC Championship game, and the Ravens and the Bengals had the Bengals lost the season finale to Baltimore, and then they would have both had the same record and had split their games. And not the same record, but the Bengals wouldn't have had a better record, but they had split their games. The thing is that the Bengals beat the Ravens, and so they swept the Ravens, and so that game was in Cincinnati. If you're asking me, do I think that this game this weekend should be on a neutral field? No. I mean, they both had the same number of games, and the Bills had the better record. So I don't see where I've not heard anything out of Cincinnati where they say, hey, this should be on a neutral field. And, I kind of don't really like neutral field. It's very collegey.
Yes. And I, for one, am not hoping that we see KC in Buffalo. I like the matchup, but I'd rather have a home field advantage in that AFC Championship game. And normally it doesn't go down to chalk, so more than likely we'll be talking about a home field advantage in the AFC title game. Let's flip. Let's discuss the game out west with San Francisco hosting Dallas. And all of a sudden, the weight is off of Mike McCarthy. Dak Prescott has the game of his season, one of the best of his career, and it came at a great time where the Cowboys now have some momentum. Meanwhile, speaking of momentum, that's exactly how to describe the San Francisco 49ers. What's the deciding factor in this game on Sunday?
It's going to be what it has been for the 49ers for weeks. Does Brock Purdy play like a second coming of Joe Montana or Tom Brady in 2020? Or at some point, do we see the reasons why he was a 7th-round draft pick, and not just a 7th-round draft pick, but the last guy selected in the entire draft? I've seen no evidence of why he went last in that draft. He goes through his progression super fast. He has the moxie. He has control of the huddle. He recognizes defenses pre-snap. This is a rookie. He's not supposed to do this. That's not allowed. And yet the guy is doing it His arm is good, not great. He's not, Josh Allen or somebody like that, but it's good. And again, I have seen no evidence of why he was the Mr. Irrelevant. He hasn't had that moment. And I'm wondering, we're going to go one of two ways here. Either he's never going to have that moment, and we're going to go into next year and the following year, and he's going to be on a track of really good player who every once in a while has a setback, but not that often. Or, the carriage is going to turn into a pumpkin, and the mice are going to come out, and they're not horses anymore. And now the shoe doesn't fit. So it's going to happen at some point, or Brock Purdy is just the next Tom Brady.
Armando, what shoe is going to fit for Sean Payton with his next NFL team? What's going to happen with that?
Well, if ownership with the Los Angeles Chargers was Major League, he would be the head coach of that team. But it's not, and so he won't. Let's see. Carolina has asked for permission to speak with him, correct?
Yes,
Yep.
And that's apparently happening later this week, right? Or tomorrow.
Correct. Right. Which is later this week.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's on the books there. Arizona wants to speak with him, and they've all kind of spoken to him. They want a full-blown interview with him. Who's the other one? There's a third one, and I'm
Denver.
Denver.
Correct. To me, the Denver situation makes a lot of sense for him because he's got a quarterback that needs help now. He's got a quarterback who has lost his way, and Sean Payton knows how to fix quarterbacks and knows how to hide the flaws of his quarterbacks. And if the quarterback happens to be only like 6 foot, 6'1", and on the back end, he's been there and done that. And people forget that defense in Denver is playoff caliber. They're not good. They're championship good when they're healthy, even without Bradley Chubb. So to me, that seems like the best fit for him. Whether that happens or not. Oh, by the way, they're owned by the Walmart heirs who can afford to buy, to redo the Louisiana Purchase if they wanted to. If the United States ever wanted to, have a scar in the middle.
They're more liquid than Chargers ownership, is what we're saying also.
A little bit, yes. They can afford anything, including human beings. And Sean Payton is one of those that they can afford.
I'm intrigued, too, about the price tag that the Saints are going to require or ask for, because once he selects his team, that's when the negotiation goes down. And every team's different. So, like, Denver traded away their first-round picks this year and next year, right, for Russell Wilson, first and second round, I believe. Carolina is in the division, which is intriguing. Meanwhile, Houston, if he chooses to go to Houston, Houston has the picks, but he's not guaranteed necessarily the quarterback he wants because they picked 2 and not 1. I mean, would the Saints trade him within the division?
I believe that they would. I believe that they would. I believe that they would hold Carolina to a higher standard than they hold, say, Denver, who, by the way, does have a first-round pick because they got it from Miami for Bradley Chubb.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay, so they would trade that away. Gotcha. So that's the destination then, because they can afford the price tag and his price tag.
But here's the thing. So that there's, as you guys know, there's a difference between asking price and selling price, right? The New Orleans asking price is a mid to late first round pick. I don't think that every team that is interested in Sean Payton will say, okay, there you go.
But it is.
I think that there's a negotiation involved. Yeah. And it could end up that it's not necessarily a first round pick. Maybe it's a second and another second next year. Maybe it's a second and a third. There's always a negotiation that happens. And I get it. Sean Payton is the guy right now. He is the hot commodity, and he's probably worth a first round pick.
Yeah.
But
yeah. And
sometimes.
And he's kind of doing the negotiation for them in a way, right? Because they're granting permission for him to speak, but he's going on Coward saying, yeah, the asking price is going to be a mid to late first round pick. And I spoke with Mickey Loomis about it. So I think up front, when he sits down with these teams, they kind of know what they're going to have to pay.
Sure. Until the person that's going to have to pull the trigger gets involved. And again, it makes sense. If you're Sean Payton and you're going to Denver and you've got one first round pick, are you eager to give that up for yourself to the other guy? No, you want to keep it if you can. And so he's going to allow, his new team, whoever that is, if indeed he goes somewhere, to try to talk that down a little bit, negotiate.
Which team do you ultimately think he goes to? You think he picks Denver?
I think that if he goes somewhere, that would be the place to go. You mentioned Houston. They have a lot of picks because they traded away a quarterback and they got 3 first-round picks for him. And so
there's also another short quarterback to work with that they could draft if they trade up one spot, and that's Bryce Young. I've thought about that with Houston being the next Drew Brees possibly for Sean Payton.
That's absolutely true. And, oh, by the way, I thought about this a little bit. Houston is sitting there at number 2. It would be painful for them to have to trade up to number 1 to get their guy. That would be a painful move. Thank you, Lovie Smith, because it ultimately could cost them another first-round pick to go up one spot. Why? Because some other team that values Bryce Young might do whatever they need to do to get to number 1. But my guess is that it's easier to go from 1 to 2 and still get like a second rounder or maybe a future first, like 2 years, 3 years down the road, than it is, to go to like 10 or 12. And now you may not have that many guys on your board that you're happy picking.
Armando Salguero, read his work, OutKick.com, covering all things NFL. It's going to be a great weekend of football. The divisional round traditionally, top to bottom, the most competitive of any NFL weekend. Armando, we're looking forward to it. Enjoy the games, and we'll catch up next week.
Thank you, gentlemen.
There he is, Armando Salguero, soothsayer on all things Brandon Staley.
He knows. He knows all.
He does. Coming up, we'll hit more headlines. That's just around the corner, and charges filed on Alec Baldwin. We got details there, reaction to it on Outkick 360.
And how long after 9/11 does your unit, the 160th SOAR, which is the most elite helicopter pilots in the world, how long does it take for you guys to figure out, okay, a plan's being set in motion, we're going to Afghanistan? Was it within days? Was it within weeks?
It was within hours.
Within hours.
So we drive back that night, the battalion commander and I, and the next morning I'm sent down in a 15-passenger van with a bunch of other planners to Tampa, Florida. And we're to plan America's response, as far as the rotary wing side of it. And by October 3rd, I was in the country of Uzbekistan preparing to do personnel recovery for the bombing campaign that was about to kick off.
And this is depicted in the movie 12 Strong. Correct me if I'm wrong, where you guys are going to fly in from Uzbekistan. This is what's known as the horse soldiers. This is going to kind of be the first wave. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. So initially we're there for, I want to say about 2 weeks of bombing. And then there is no further plan that we know of. And then all of a sudden, 5th Special Forces Group rolls in. Their commander takes over the task force. We're in Task Force Dagger. out of K2 Air Base, Karshi-Kanabad, and he wants a briefing on our capabilities. And so we sat down and we started talking to him about, the mountains and the distances that we can or can't fly, the way the weather is, and all these things. And he's like, "Gee, I wish somebody had told us that ahead of time." And ironically, when I was in Tampa, they were one room over, and nobody ever connected us, because it just wasn't considered important. But now it was, especially as they heard that, the mountains were, 20,000 feet, and that the weather was horrible and all these things. And so we tell him what we can do. And he goes, "Well, you guys are going to start doing a UW campaign, which is unconventional warfare. That's where you link up individual operational detachments, or ODAs, up with factions of the Northern Alliance, which were the allies that we were trying to coordinate with." So it went from there.
So, and I'm glad you brought up the 20,000 feet thing, because I had it in my notes. I wanted to ask you, in the movie, it's depicted that helicopters had never flown that high, and they weren't sure whether or not it could be done. Was that how it actually worked in real life, that you guys didn't know if the altitude was even workable?
Yes and no, but not for the reasons that you might think. So helicopters had flown that high. Chinook helicopters routinely fly at 25,000 feet in Alaska, right over the mountains there. They do the rescue mission at the top of that. It was at Mount McKinley, I think. And so it is possible, but using carrying a usable load, going the distance that we need to go, as far as, because we had to trade off fuel for cargo, if you will, people. Right. And so the math didn't work out, and we're wearing supplemental oxygen, or how long is that going to last, per console for the people you got on board. So there's a lot of calculations that have to go into this that, really weren't operationally proven. I operated in Colorado all the time, but that's nothing compared to Afghanistan.
from 6th and Peabody with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. Glad you're with us across the OutKick network for OutKick 360. Chad, this story with Alec Baldwin, it feels like this happened like 5 years ago to me. 2021 is when he was on the set of Rust, and he claims he cocked the gun. He said he still maintains he never pulled the trigger. Cocked the gun that killed cinematographer on set there, where he thought there were dummy rounds and instead there were live rounds. And he's been charged with involuntary manslaughter. He faces 18 months in prison based on this. He's also filed a countersuit saying that he was falsely blamed, or there was too much blame put his way based on all of the procedures that should have been in place.
It's a tough deal because it was clearly an accident, awful one at that. And it does feel like it's been going on forever. When I hear Alec Baldwin, it feels like for the last 4 or 5 years, the first thing I think about is this issue on the movie Rust, where he killed someone died. Now, I've never acted in an action movie. I have seen and heard other actors saying, yeah, that's not really the protocol that you follow, that could happen. People that have handled weapons, movie weapons all the time, being in action movies or shows, that there is a way to go about it if you know guns, that you can very clearly check if there's live rounds or not before you even point it.
And the armorer who's on set has also been charged with the same.
Yeah, and I think that's where most of the responsibility probably goes, is whoever's responsible for the weapons on set and putting them out there. But I think it was, I want to say George Clooney maybe was saying, I always double check. Even when they hand it to me, before I point it at anyone, because he knows how to shoot weapons, he'll look down. If he's doing a movie, Matt Damon, I think, said it also, and we'll look to see if there's, make sure it's dummy rounds and not something that's going to kill somebody.
The question, someone put live rounds in the dummy round box, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the central question that has yet to be answered and all that.
It's really unfortunate. I feel obviously awful for the woman's family.
Yeah.
I feel bad for Alec Baldwin. Who did that? What was there malice involved? Is this just incompetence, or is this something that was intended to happen from someone?
And last year, Baldwin was also named in the wrongful death suit filed by the family of the cinematographer, and her husband, the cinematographer's husband, said recently that the suit had been settled. So that part is behind him, but now he's facing these charges. Official today, full story at OutKick.com. Headlines when we return, including hiring and firing across the NFL. That continues.
A longtime college basketball coach is going to hang it up at the end of the year. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, big news. We've got details there, plus one big thing on every NFL game a bit later in hour number 3. Hang with us. OutKick 360 rolls on from 6th and Peabody across the OutKick network.
College football's in trouble. There's a lot of people trying to keep it from happening.
I think it's a general consensus across the college football landscape. We want to play football.
College football is a huge part of the fall. It's a huge part of Americana itself.
It just really felt like people in the country needed college football to just feel a little sense of normal.
Big news from the Big Ten as the conference releasing its 10-game football schedule.
We go home thinking that we're going to be practicing the next day. Everybody gets a text, stay home, everything's canceled.
Big Ten fall football season has been canceled.
We just believe collectively there's too much uncertainty.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, though, Kevin, is that was the same position you had 6 days ago.
The Big Ten is an unmitigated disaster.
There was a ton of confusion. There was presidents saying one thing, there was coaches saying another.
Players had to be silent, coaches had to be silent, ADs had to be silent.
People said, how does what you just did make any sense?
And nobody really knew what the heck happened when they voted to cancel the season.
You make this huge historical announcement, and then Kevin Warren never does a press conference to explain it. It was like a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis.
The word really that was lacking in all of this is transparency.
It felt like a lot of stuff was happening behind closed doors.
Even today, we still don't know what occurred.
So you don't tell us parents, that's fine, but you're not telling the young men that it affects.
We have to make a decision to save the season. What about the history books? What about the rivalry games? What about Paul Bunyan's axe? How is that not going to go to a team this year?
This is a failure of epic magnitude, the Big Ten presidents and leaders should be held accountable for the disastrous decisions that they're making.
Then the commissioner doubles down, saying his decision will not be revisited.
And that's the point. It felt like a war was declared on the Big Ten and Kevin Warren.
Everything turned political.
Because if this is medical, then you would have stopped the game of football a long time ago.
I think the Big Ten leaders will tell you that they probably made a mistake in hindsight.
If I had the chance to do it all over last year, I would make the same decisions that we made.
Just like that, the final hour is here. Thursday edition, OutKick 360. Chad, Mike.
Almost made it, Hutton. This long week. It feels like Saturday, but it's Thursday.
Thursday.
We've almost made it. So close.
The South Bend Tribune reporting that Notre Dame basketball coach Mike Bray will retire at the end of the season. Plans to tell the team after practice. 23 seasons in South Bend for Coach Bray.
Mike Bray, 23 seasons, but also crazy because I think of Mike Bray and I think of success at Notre Dame. I mean, you last anywhere in major college basketball that long. It's very successful. He's only been to one NCAA tournament in 6 years. Now, I say that to not blast Mike Bray. I say that as a warning to fans of teams that don't understand that it can be difficult to regularly make the tournament. Tennessee basketball fans, one of them. I got into this debate with a number of people where they're saying, well, if your goal is to make the tournament every year, then Rick Barnes is a good coach. And I'm thinking, at Tennessee, that's not a bad goal to have. In my life, they've had years where they're not going to the tournament, and it's a miracle when it happens eventually. Now, that's a good basketball program, Tennessee, but that's maybe not the best example. South Carolina, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Northwestern, who's never been but one time to the tournament. You can go on down the list of Power 5 conference schools that don't regularly make the tournament. Nebraska, who I'm watching last night against Ohio State. So many examples of these teams that when you see someone like Mike Bray, who pretty regularly was making it early in his career, but hasn't in the last 6 years, it shows you it's not easy to do, all the time. So I think of him with great success, but it surprised me that number. 1 in 6 years, the last 6 he's been to the tournament.
And they made the Elite Eight in 14 and 15. and in the 2016 season as well. Yeah, and he's the winningest coach at Notre Dame, 481 wins. And, Chad, there's also something to be said for stepping away at the right time, right?
Yeah.
Instead of a year too late or being forced out and it being known. And maybe, there's conversations behind the scenes with everything. But the fact he's going out in his own terms and he's, announcing it today that it's over at the end of the year, he's going out the right way.
Yeah, Colin, who's our radio producer, is a huge Notre Dame fan, and he had mentioned Digger Phelps as, the guy for him. I mean, Digger Phelps, Mike Bray, if you said Notre Dame basketball, those are the two names that come to mind. That's always the test for me. Like, say a program, and then if you have to think for 30 seconds on who's the top name you think of with that program, those are going to be two of the top ones that you think about of all time. And Mike Bray's had a heck of a career, and you're right, 64 years old. They've got a losing record right now. They're probably not going to be in the tournament. 1 in 6 years. Now's the time to retire. I think it's the right decision.
How about this? Broncos quarterback Russell Wilson has called Sean Payton to let him know that he wants Payton to be the Broncos head coach. Now, this is, of course, the logical destination based on everything that's in place within the organization, right? But this is interesting because you've got the former Super Bowl winning quarterback who's been to 2, won 1, coming off an abysmal season. And he's reaching out to the guy that he wants to work with to make sure he gets back to what is expected to be the Russell Wilson way in Denver. Cowherd is the one putting this out there. Russell Wilson has contacted Sean, legally, by the way, through channels. He wants Sean Payton. He needs fixing.
Through channels.
He needs fixing. He knows he needs fixing. And Cowherd also know that he's talked with Sean Payton about the Broncos' job, which we've alluded to earlier this week. But he had a career low, Russell Wilson did, career low passer rating, 84.4. And he completed just 60% of his pass attempts, 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. And Payton has been very open about how he would go about fixing Russell Wilson while on Fox. It makes a lot of sense.
First off, I want to work in through channels
through
to everything
channels.
I do. I don't
legally
ever,
through channels.
Hutton, I don't think you and I should communicate directly anymore. Let's always talk, quote, through channels. That's how we officially talk on this show, is through channels at all times. Love that. There's, a phrase of big you-know-what energy. That's what's happening with Rob Walton and the Broncos right now. The Russell Wilson move, which has backfired, no doubt. That was a big you-know-what energy move. Sean Payton, to me, if I'm looking at ownership groups and what they want to do to make a splash.
Keep in mind, they traded for him prior to selling.
Yeah, but I'm saying the direction it's going, that was done pre-sell to sell to a guy like Rob Walton.
Yeah, the
for
value increased.
$4.8 billion, I think was the price tag when he bought the team.
Yep.
The largest in professional sports history. This feels like a big move. I mean, the whole time we're trying to match up Sean Payton where he's going to go.
And it's the opposite.
I've always felt like this is a Walmart owner heir type move.
And it's the opposite of the coach they just hired and fired.
Who was a dunce.
Yes.
In every way possible from day one.
It's just not made out to be a head coach.
Well, it's the opposite.
Good offensive
Let's
coach,
also look at the Chargers.
Assistant.
We discussed this with Armando Salguero. The Chargers are a low-energy franchise with their ownership group. They feel like they're just skating by.
They're a stepchild.
Yeah,
they're the Rams.
They're hoping to look at their books at the end of the year and be in the black. And that's about it. They're not going big. They never do that. When they play home games, the stadium's taken over by the opposing team's fan base. They're a franchise trying to skate by. The Broncos are not. When you spend $4.8 billion on a product like the Walton family did, and headed by Rob Walton, you're going big. This feels like a big Broncos move to go and get Sean Payton, if it can work out. We got the YouTube chat going right now, and people are saying this is all going to come down to what Sean Payton wants. Yes and no, because something we've talked about constantly, Hutton, you've got to have the capital to do it. It's got to be the deal also with the Saints. It's not just Sean Payton goes to Mickey Loomis and the Saints and says, This is where I want to go. Make it happen. Don't care what happens for you guys in this. It's going to take all parties agreeing.
The organization that I think can really turn things around with him is Houston. The perception with Houston is they have leadership issues from ownership down. And Caserio, they've been through, 3 straight years with a new head coach and going into 4 straight years with a different head coach to begin opening weekend. By bringing in Sean Payton and having the number 2 overall pick, potentially number 1, but you got to trade up. We know that. But to pair the quarterback with Payton and then start building out the franchise the right way, that to me is a big turning point for them that they can make outside of any other hire right now. The other organizations like Carolina, Denver, you've got Payton coming in there, but it doesn't feel like Carolina's got a nice young team, but you still don't know where they are in the pecking order of the NFC. I think the quality for them is their NFC, though, right? Meanwhile, Chad, in Denver, you're just in the mix of everything, and it's still Russell Wilson, no matter how you look at it, going into year 12, I believe. You've got the aging quarterback where eventually you're going to have to pair something else with Sean Payton based on the contract you're going to give him. I think if you're looking for the fresh start, clean slate, power move, Houston can also do that for an organization that has not made great moves lately.
Let's rank the options right now. So for Sean Payton, just outside in, this is not Sean Payton's mind, it's mine. 3 legitimate options I'm going to list right now: Carolina, Denver, and Houston. Carolina, to me, is only appealing if they trade up to number 1, which I've said I think that may happen, where they trade up to number 1 and get, let's say, Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud, whoever it is, as their number 1 pick. That's very, very appealing. That franchise, David Tepper, that quarterback.
Let me also say, Carolina and David, they have wanted to go after the free agent quarterback. And Rodgers had been mentioned there during that saga with Green Bay last year and the year prior. So I'm just throwing that out there because Tepper continues to talk about veteran quarterback.
It's interesting. I don't think that's appealing right now to Sean Payton. I don't. And I'm going back to those initial reports that the 2 teams he's most interested in, Cardinals, Chargers, because of the young quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Because of guys he could have for a while. So I don't think
guys.
A 1 or 2 year, play 1 year and then worry about the guy retiring after that year is that appealing to him. So I think for that reason, Panthers are clearly 3rd of those 3 teams.
And he meets with them tomorrow.
Texans are very appealing to me.
Me too.
Because the Texans, you are the man in the franchise. You're starting from scratch. They've got a decent base based on all the picks they've had and high picks and everything else, but you are going to have the ability to draft your quarterback of choice, whether that be trading up 1 spot or even at number 2. You're going to have that young quarterback you want. So I'm putting Texans 1. The Broncos are the better franchise. It's a short tenure that we've had with Rob Walton as the owner, but I'd put their ownership group above the Texans and their entire setup. So I think historically, infrastructure, everything better with the Broncos than with the Texans. But you're also inheriting Russell Wilson. So does a reclamation project with a guy who does have years left in his career, but not a ton.
And on that contract.
But not a ton. Does that interest you more than a rookie quarterback with Bryce Young, let's say, coming into Houston? So what's your preference there? Here's my preference. Houston 1, Denver 2, Carolina 3, if I'm Sean Payton. Because I am essentially the team owner in Houston if I'm Sean Payton with your guy at quarterback, knowing that you're going to draft a quarterback number 1 or number 2 overall, and that is your guy. You're married to him. That is your future. I would take that scenario.
Well, and he has done a lot of great things with Drew Brees. I think the underrated value of Sean Payton was shown last year where he took that team to right on the verge of a postseason berth. And I think the Saints were the last team that were really screwed over by the COVID protocols too last year. But he went through 4 different quarterbacks, Chad, and still had that team competitive. The drop him into what is already established Denver's the number one option.
Now that's the parachute approach.
Solid defense.
Parachute him in, and he's going to do something with Russell Wilson and change the course of that.
But isn't it interesting
defense.
that Wilson acknowledges that? Right? Like Wilson's recruiting him. It's not just Denver willing to, hey, fix our quarterback. Wilson is calling him to have him go to Denver.
You know, I don't really want to hear from Russell Wilson right now after this
I would
season.
if I'm Sean Payton. I mean, you're married to him if you go there because you can't move on based on the cap restraints if you do. So if you go there, you're signing up with Russell Wilson.
Well, I say that to say, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Who wouldn't want to work with Sean Payton? Especially someone as bad as Russell Wilson this last year.
Well.
Right? I mean, I don't know that that's a sales pitch. Is Bryce Young going to come in and say, you know, I don't want to work with this coach based on his track record? So I don't.
But pairing up like
I mean, working through channels, again, we got to go through channels. Working through channels to get to Sean Payton. Russell Wilson is at a very, very, I know his contract is great, but he's not negotiating or recruiting from a place of power right now. I don't want to hear from Russell Wilson for the time being. Let's watch.
The only power he has is the fact he can't be moved.
Look, if Sean Payton comes in and that offense looks different and Nathaniel Hackett proves to be the moron we all saw that he was last year, and they look better and he looks better and Sean Payton's calling plays and designing offense that works for Russell Wilson, then I'll hear from you again, Russell Wilson. I don't want to hear from him right now.
Let me also throw out just what has been acknowledged because the NFL penalized Miami for it. The recruitment of the Dolphins with Sean Payton, pairing him with Tom Brady, who is going to be available. That's the other X factor here. Can you bring him to Houston? Could you bring him to Carolina?
I just don't think, again, I mean, Sean Payton, I'm going off the original report that he favored two teams, young quarterbacks of both teams. I don't think Sean Payton is looking to parachute in somewhere and coach Brady or Rodgers for a year and try to win a title with them.
Well, I mean,
and then start over.
But it's just no different than Russell Wilson wanting to work with Sean Payton. I would want to work with Justin Herbert too if I'm Sean Payton.
But if I'm Sean Payton also, I am looking at it. I look at Houston for this reason. I want to go somewhere and do the Saints again. Let's do that again. Let's get a quarterback that's going to start out that I can develop and mold, and let's have an 8 to 10 year run. Then I'll retire. Let's win a Super Bowl or two. Let's be in the playoffs every year with that quarterback. I don't have to worry about it once I have my guy, and let's move forward. I just don't think – I could be completely wrong. I just don't think Sean Payton wants to get parachuted in to a situation with a one-year fix of Brady and then wipe that whole thing clean and start over again. But that would be fun to watch if he was paired with one of those guys for a year. But it's probably going to be a year, maybe two.
Well, and they went after him. You know, they were linked together last year. I wonder if Brady, you know, in the talks with Miami, I'd love to have the fast forward 20 years for the 30 for 30 feature on that yacht meeting.
How surprised would you be if Brady retired this offseason, actually stuck to it?
I would be surprised.
I'd be shocked.
I'd be surprised. He's playing.
I'd be shocked based on everything that's gone down. I'd be shocked if he hung it up after this season.
What about Rodgers?
I wouldn't be as shocked. I'd be surprised a little bit, but I wouldn't be as shocked. I think they're both coming back and playing with different teams. That's what I think is likely to happen.
Unless...
Here's the other one. Derek Carr. Does Sean Payton have any interest in Derek Carr in Carolina, let's say?
That's
kind of the Russell Wilson. I mean, if you're looking at two guys right now, you could flip a coin and tell me who's going to have the better next 5 years in the league between Derek Carr and Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson looks done this year. It was so bad with Nathaniel Hackett. Maybe that's the biggest problem.
Well,
but he looked awful, and he was bad the year before. He was down the year before.
And the team around him, you just watching it. It wasn't Zach Wilson awful with the body language of the team with him. It was pretty bad.
Yeah,
with Russell Wilson out there. Not like they had a great backup option, but I'm saying the overall vibe with the team didn't feel like the vibe with the team in Seattle.
Granted, Derek Carr did not win enough. Everyone can admit that with the Raiders. I didn't get the same sense that his teammates were down on him the way that Russell Wilson's teammates were. That the body language is bad. Maybe I'm wrong.
There's a report out, by the way, speaking of Wilson in New York, that after the 10-3 loss against New England, the game that was 3-3 that ended on the pick, or the kick return, excuse me, that they openly were like vocal and like celebrating the fact that Zach Wilson was going to be benched. And that there was a like vocal sigh, like a groan, whenever they learned that Mike White wasn't cleared to play and Zach Wilson was back in.
All that offseason talk about him with the mom, the Cougar, just went right away.
Peak Zach Wilson.
Yep. BYU Cougars, and then his Cougar, and then that was the last good press that Zach Wilson ever received. You know,
that was it.
Really looked like an alpha for a little bit, and then went right away.
He needs another offseason. That's right. Coming up, one big thing on every NFL game for the divisional round, and we will discuss the new generation of quarterbacks on OutKick 360.
As we move past the college football regular season, the postseason, and the playoff championship game, is there, are we going to see, in your opinion, are we going to see the same storyline going into next year? Do you think with the same teams? And I'm talking, okay, Bama, Georgia, two teams that are looking for a new quarterback, by the way, in Bama and Georgia. Ohio State is as well. Michigan's going to return J.J. McCarthy. Harbaugh, this NFL nonsense saga comes to an end for another year yesterday. Do you think it's trending towards where, okay, with the playoff expansion coming up too, okay, we got our 4 or 5 teams. You know what I mean? Maybe Clemson gets back in there. There's a few other. But do you feel like Kirby Smart has set himself up now where he's running a dynasty at Alabama? At Georgia, along with Nick Saban trying to run his own dynasty at Alabama.
Yeah, I think that was probably the takeaway that everybody had. Every podcast that I listened to after the game, every column that I read, and certainly what I wrote and what I said on my own show, I think we're there, man. And, I think what stands out is, one, it goes like, I think it's easy. And I was one of the people that was critical of Kirby Smart pre-national championship game last year, but they've been elite for about 5-6 years now. I looked up the stat. I can't remember it. I think it was since that title game run in 2018, outside of the COVID year, I think they've won at least 11 games every year. Now, they couldn't get over the hump, and part of it was they ran into really good teams. They ran into a historically great LSU team in 2019. 2018, they obviously had Bama on the ropes in the SEC title game. And so now they're there, but they're there with the confidence of knowing that they can beat anybody in college football. And so it is kind of amazing. They went in an 18-month span from the team that you expected to find a way to lose the big game to now, I think they're the best big game team in college football. You look at their season, what were their best performances? The national championship game, a season opener against Oregon when we all still had questions of all the talent that they lost, the Tennessee game when Tennessee came in number 1 in the country. And so I think we're there. And then I would also add, I would also say being there, and one of the reasons I was so excited this game was in LA, because I host radio on Saturdays, I don't get to cover a lot of games during the season. Just to be around Kirby Smart, to be around those players, I think that standard has been set. And Kirby said it himself. He's like, the biggest thing for us right now is complacency, because we have a chance to be really good again next year as well. So I think they go into next year. I think they should be the favorite. Every sportsbook I've seen, they are the favorite. But I do think there's some other interesting storylines now that Jim Harbaugh is back with J.J. McCarthy, as you said, for one more year. I think this could be it. He's never going to say it publicly, but he's got his quarterback. Ohio State's young, games at home against Ohio State. And then, like you said, moving parts at Ohio State, Alabama, Penn State's interesting with maybe a quarterback upgrade, even though they lose Sean Clifford. So yeah, I'm excited already about the narratives. But yeah, if you told me on the day of selection Sunday that Georgia's the number 1 seed, 13-0 off an SEC championship, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all next December.
Aaron, when's we've talked about this before. When's the Harbaugh mess just come to an end? I know you just said next year, but man, we we cover this sport and we hear things and we hear stuff coming out of the NFL and we hear Harbaugh's interest, and he has interest. Look, if there was a job that was really offering him, and I mean a set in stone offer to leave, I think he would not be the coach at Michigan right now.
OutKick 360 rolls on across the OutKick network with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. Our location at 6th and Peabody in Music City. Hutton and Withrow with you. Chad, what's your favorite game of the weekend?
Favorite game of the weekend? Niners-Cowboys. Can't get away from that one. Maybe it's nostalgic for my childhood, watching those games in the 90s. I mean, going back to the 80s, these were big-time games between these two franchises. But I just think it's just a beautiful game to watch. These colors on the field together. I have long been a proponent of the 49ers uniforms. Some of the best in all of sports, the color combination. But Cowboys-Niners on the field next to each other, always beautiful. I'm most excited about this one.
For me, it's Bengals-Bills.
That's second place for me.
I mean, and both of those are on Sunday.
That's a good answer.
Two great games on Saturday as well. Here's one big thing on every NFL game for the divisional round. And, Chad, let's start. We'll just go in order of kickoff. Jacksonville on the road against Kansas City. We get the rematch from Week 10, where Kansas City opened with a 20-point advantage. And Jacksonville tried to close the gap. They weren't boat raced. It felt like it was going to be. But this is one of those games where the Jags have to come out firing on all cylinders. This is not some comeback kid in Trevor Lawrence, because you can't do that against KC. They have to go toe-to-toe, and then they also have to make some breaks for themselves. Kansas City's defense doesn't get the ball back that often. They don't have many takeaways compared to the other defenses that are remaining. But they're right outside the top 10 in total defense, which is vastly different than where they were entering the playoffs last year. Trevor Lawrence has got to protect the football and then rely on great games from Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Marvin Jones, Evan Ingram, who we saw here in Nashville have a fantastic performance, the best performance of any single game from a tight end this year. They have to click on all cylinders against a Kansas City team that I think comes out maybe a bit sluggish, but turns it on in the second half. I think Jacksonville can hang with them. And here's Zay Jones, who I think could be an X factor. He's coming off a year where he had a career high in catches, receiving yards. Third straight postseason game is what he can have with a touchdown reception. He also caught 10 passes whenever they met in Week 10, Zay Jones. Be on the lookout for him against Kansas City's defense. He's like a third option, but he's great for Trevor Lawrence in this matchup.
If I had to pick one game I think could be a blowout, it's this one. But we're in the divisional round now. I mean, there's no game you look at and say, oh, this is definitely going to be this team by 3 scores or anything close to that. But I'm leaning towards this one. If one could get out of hand, it's Chiefs over Jags.
And KC doesn't have much of a run game, but they do have a solid running back in Jerick McKinnon this year. He led all NFL running backs 9 touchdown catches this season. That's the most by a running back in a single season in the Super Bowl era. He's also averaging 110 yards from scrimmage per game. So while they don't have much of a run game to lean on, the extension of their run game through McKinnon is fantastic. And the young, fast Jags defense is going to be trying to track him down. Meanwhile, ETN is also capable of taking over. This is a fun game.
That play call to ETN on 4th and short, where instead of they lined up where it was going to be the sneak with the players from behind shoving the quarterback forward, and it ran to the outside with ETN. That made it an easy field goal to win the game. A brilliant play call, gutsy play call in that moment on 4th and short, but ETN showed off that speed on that play.
Do you trust Daniel Jones? I don't.
I think my hesitation probably answers the question.
I want to buy into this. I'm just not sold on the fact that he's going to go back-to-back performances where he takes over a postseason game. Philadelphia has won its last 9 home games against the New York Giants. And to me, this is, when we talk blowouts, this could be the blowout of the weekend. A lot of people are picking the Giants. I want to buy into what Daniel Jones has done. It's a phenomenal story and turnaround. He's earned the right to be back as the starting quarterback for Brian Daboll, who's going to be coach of the year. But I think everything stacks up well for Philly in this matchup. Everyone's pointing to Week 18. Rewind to their first matchup where Philly won easily in the regular season, and Jalen Hurts is not on the injury report. That's a key factor for a defense that can get after the quarterback with 65-plus sacks, great on the back end of their D, receiving options for days, a run game that always shows up, and a quarterback that's truly dual threat. I think they're ready to take over. And whoever they end up hosting for the NFC Championship game, that's going to be the game of the year.
My question to your question about Daniel Jones is, do we truly trust Jalen Hurts in this game? I trust Jalen Hurts in that Eagles offense more than what his supporting cast is for Daniel Jones. But I think it's a viable question right now also with the lack of true big-time playoff experience.
Hodgins for Jones is a great target for the Giants here. He led the Giants 8 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown against Minnesota. And he has a touchdown catch in 5 of his last 6 games, which counts last week. Can they keep that going? This is a group where, and maybe I think it's probably still the case, I think if you poll the average NFL fan, I think the average fan, Chad, is hard-pressed to name 5 players on their roster. And I'm giving you 2 with Jones and Saquon.
You know what that leads to? NFL Coach of the Year.
Yep.
Because there's not huge star power on the team, and they're here in the divisional round.
And against a division opponent. So that can also benefit Daboll and company. And the X factor can be Wink Martindale, who came over from Baltimore, and now he's tasked with slowing down the Philadelphia offense. Sunday, we kick things off. Bengals, Bills. Cincinnati enters having won 9 straight games. The Bills have won 8 straight. But Miami is the only playoff team that they faced throughout this stretch of 8 straight wins. Now, of course, they kicked off against Cincinnati. That game ended midway through the first quarter. They have 4 wins of their 14 against teams that made the postseason. Buffalo. Miami played them twice. And they also played against KC in Baltimore. I'm not saying I think that's a detriment to this team. They're the best, if not, second best, I think, top to bottom to Philly. And I would certainly take them over KC. I would take Cincinnati over KC right now. But Josh Allen, while he's excellent, he's elite, if he continues to play the way he's been playing, Chad, Cincinnati's going to win this game. And it won't be by a single possession. Josh Allen's turning it over way too much. 3 more turnovers this past Sunday, and he now has an NFL high 22 turnovers, 16 interceptions, 6 fumbles, lost fumbles, and he has 6 picks in his last 3 starts. It's routine. It's not a one-off for him anymore.
We don't like to talk about what happened in the game that Demar Hamlin had his incident in, but I believe it was 7-0 Cincinnati, and they were driving.
7-3.
It was 7-3. They were driving maybe to go up 14-3 at that point in the game. I say that to say this. I need to see Buffalo play well. They didn't play well against the Dolphins. They allowed a team that had no business hang around.
Yeah.
Because they played poorly. This is a really good Bills team. They need a good performance. Obviously, to win, they're going to need to play really well against the Cincinnati team. But for just the sake of believing in this team right now, they need to come out and have a great game. That's what I want to see on Sunday when they take the field. We haven't really seen it. I don't think the New England performance was particularly great. You got 2 Nyheim Hines kickoff returns for touchdowns. That's the difference in the game.
Yep.
Other than that, they're dead even with a pretty mediocre to bad,
very average
Patriots team.
Yep.
So let's pick it up right now, Buffalo. Time
Buffalo's
to pick it back
defense. Is this the game where they make up for the loss of Von Miller, or is this the game where we actually see the lack of Von Miller come and play a factor? Because Cincinnati's offensive line banged up. They're going to miss 3 starters from the group that they overhauled this offseason. Starting a couple rookies now. And can they get after Joe Burrow? Can they put pressure on him? Cincy's defense not great on third down. Buffalo's defense has been. Can they take advantage of a depleted offensive line for Cincy? And Gabe Davis, 6 catches, 113 yards, a touchdown last week. 3rd straight playoff game with a receiving touchdown. Of course, we know the game of his life against KC. Can they connect again and allow Buffalo to have the 1-2 punch? I think this is a fantastic game.
Again, it just sounds simple. I need to see Buffalo play well.
Well, but
they haven't done that.
Cincy didn't play well last week either.
No.
But I trust Joe Burrow.
We're going to be trusting Joe Burrow or Josh Allen out of this game. That's the big question.
Cowboys 49ers, Chad's game of the week.
Yes.
Prescott against the Bucs, fantastic. Not many quarterbacks, though, have been fantastic against San Francisco's defense. This is a defense that finished the regular season number 1 in scoring. They've allowed just 16 points per game. Total defense, number 1 in the NFL. They, on average, 300 total yards per game. Opposing quarterbacks average 223 passing yards per game and just over 1 touchdown per game. That's unbelievable in a passing league and a league that's set up where the rules are against you if you're a defensive-minded football team.
One more chance for Brock Purdy to shock the world and show that he is the next Tom Brady. That happens this weekend.
Tony Pollard, the Cowboys' top running back, and their best offensive weapon. Career highs in yards from scrimmage this year, rushing yards, receiving yards, rushing touchdowns, receiving touchdowns. Will they just rely on the run game instead of putting it all on the shoulder of Dak Prescott?
They're going to try to rely on the run game until they have to rely on the shoulder of Dak Prescott. That is my prediction for this game. That is going to be the game plan. They're not going to be able to do it. 49ers are too good just to have the Cowboys run all over them and win this game. They're going to run it. They're going to run it well at times, but this is going to come down to Dak Prescott not screwing it up. He didn't do it against Tampa. In fact, he was brilliant in that game. Terrific performance. They're going to need that again from Dak Prescott in this game. This is not going to be a line up, run it, don't make big plays, the quarterback position win for the Cowboys. He's going to have to play huge in this game.
Well, and the Dallas defense, you alluded to this earlier this week, can the Dallas defense rattle the rookie quarterback? With Micah Parsons and Diggs and the entire crew.
They rattled Tom Brady.
The entire crew that has been great in stretches. They finished the season. They can get after the QB, but they finished the season not really rushing the quarterback all that well. Can they get after Purdy? Can they force him into some mistakes and then take advantage of short field options with Prescott, who looks locked in? I mean, the way he played last week, I think that carries over. There's a confidence level of just getting over the hump against a very average playoff team in Tampa that I think can carry over to San Francisco and what's going to be a dogfight.
Yeah, it's Brady, not a good offense this year. A lot of issues with that. But I felt like he was legitimately confused post-snap in the game against the Cowboys. If they can do that to Tom Brady, they can do it to Brock Purdy in this game.
That's one big thing on every NFL game. And throughout this, you mentioned Brady, no Rodgers, no quarterback over the age of 30 years old. Prescott's the oldest quarterback remaining. And what we had a big discussion topic on this past summer, where this felt like the passing of the torch to the new generation of quarterback, the new era of quarterbacks. And it's very lopsided, AFC where it's stacked in the AFC, top to bottom, with the playoff status of what you expect from the QBs. But even from the NFC perspective, with Jalen Hurts coming on, Daniel Jones playing very well, Brock Purdy being one of the top storylines of the NFL, especially if they win this week and he goes to the NFC Championship game, and Dak Prescott, the QB of America's team, potentially taking Dallas to the NFC Championship game with a chance to host it if the Giants pull the upset as well.
Crazy that Mahomes is 27 and Allen is 26. Feels like, especially with Mahomes, we've been talking about them for 10 years.
Well,
it feels like they've been in the league for a decade. With as much as that we've talked about them, especially Patrick Mahomes.
The other thing that's crazy is Stetson Bennett would be the third oldest quarterback, right? No,
Yeah.
fourth.
He's 25.
Yeah. Third, even fourth oldest remaining of the active QBs.
It's nuts. I thought that the playoffs at this point, without a Brady or a Rodgers especially, would be dampened a bit. I don't feel that way with this group of teams and quarterbacks left. I don't feel that way going into this weekend. I feel like we've got a good set of quarterbacks, a good set of teams. Crazy, though, to look at the ages of some of these guys that you feel like you've been talking about them forever, and they're still in their mid to late 20s.
Well, and then I think this would also give me some hesitation depending on the job status, because it is about trying to keep your job. Let's throw that out there too from general managers and head coaches. But it's about winning first and foremost. That's how you keep your job. I would also be looking at this as, is the investment in Brady and Rodgers where it's more valuable than trying to go
find the next one of these guys?
Yeah, because I think we're really seeing the changing of the guard. Now it's very much like I'm thinking in a different mindset if I'm in the NFC compared to the AFC. But if you're in the AFC, look at Denver has, they would like to take back what they've done, right, with Russell Wilson.
There's only one or two teams, I feel like, every year that's in that position that the roster around quarterback is good enough to take a swing on a guy who's 45 or a guy who's 40 to be the quarterback for a year, maybe two, to make that happen. Hutton, I think with everyone else, you're always looking for that next guy. Houston definitely in a position looking for the next guy. Carolina, got to find the next guy in the draft. You got to find this 20-something that's going to be in this list that we've been showing you of quarterbacks in the playoffs. You got to find that guy. It's not worth it to go for the older quarterback for a one-year fix. It's just a very limited group of teams that you can realistically point to and say they may be really good with the right guy. That's the teams we talked about. Vegas, the Jets, maybe Miami. Outside of that, there's really no one. Everyone else either has a quarterback or is in a clear position to find the next young quarterback.
And 5 of the 8 QBs remaining are first-round picks.
Yep.
Purdy's the outlier. Final pick in the NFL draft with an amazing story. Prescott was a 4th-round pick. And Jalen Hurts a 2nd-round pick, 53rd overall, with a chance to take over as the top QB in the NFC. But beyond that, the investment comes through the first-round draft, which goes back to the Sean Payton discussion and why Houston makes a ton of sense.
Absolutely. Huge news in recruiting, by the way, in the transfer portal. Eric Gilbert, who's a former number 1 or number 2 overall player in the country, 5-star tight end, was at Georgia, got lost in the shuffle behind Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington, didn't play at tight end. He is headed to Nebraska. And Matt Rule, transferring from Georgia to Nebraska. Matt Rule is going to do good things at Nebraska. He's going to recruit well.
What's the start for him been like so far?
It's been good. I mean, it's not been overwhelming, but they've had an uptick in recruiting.
Just like this.
And the transfer portal's been good to them.
I think he can win relatively fast there.
I told all my in-laws in Nebraska this when they were asking about my thoughts on it. I said he's going to look like a hero because they're going to go 7-5 this year.
And
they've been so bad at winning close games. I don't think that Nebraska, from a roster standpoint, is that far off, even with their bad records, from being 7-5, 8-4, especially in the Big Ten West, which is incredibly weak.
Yes.
So he's going to look great because they're going to go to a bowl game and be a couple games over 500. That's my prediction.
What's his offense going to be able to look like in year one?
Depends on who's playing quarterback. Casey Thompson's coming back, who was the transfer from Texas.
Can he do what he wants to do?
The transfer from Sims, Blake Sims from Georgia Tech is transferring in. So they're going to have a mobile guy at quarterback. Yeah, I think that they're going to be able to do most of what they want to try to do. Obviously not a finished product based on who you need to bring in for recruiting, but it's not going to be bad.
Hit us up on social at OutKick360. Coming up, we'll take a peek at the sports landscape for tonight. We've got some SEC hoops we can preview as well. And the report out of New York involving Zach Wilson and the reaction from the locker room in a 10-3 loss. Craziness to know what was going on behind the scenes for a team that was positioned for the postseason at the time. That's next on OutKick 360.
And how long after 9/11 does your unit, the 160th SOAR, which is the most elite helicopter pilots in the world, how long does it take for you guys to figure out, okay, a plan's being set in motion, we're going to Afghanistan? Was it within days? Was it within weeks?
It was within hours.
Within hours.
So we drive back that night, the battalion commander and I, and the next morning I'm sent down in a 15-passenger van with a bunch of other planners to Tampa, Florida. And we're to plan America's response, as far as the rotary wing side of it. And by October 3rd, I was in the country of Uzbekistan preparing to do personnel recovery for the bombing campaign that was about to kick off.
And this is depicted in the movie 12 Strong. Correct me if I'm wrong, where you guys are going to fly in from Uzbekistan. This is what's known as the horse soldiers. This is going to kind of be the first wave. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. So initially we're there for, I want to say about 2 weeks of bombing. And then there is no further plan that we know of. And then all of a sudden, 5th Special Forces Group rolls in. Their commander takes over the task force. We were in Task Force Dagger out of K2 Air Base, Karshi-Kanabad, and he wants a briefing on our capabilities. And so we sat down and we started talking to him about, the mountains and the distances that we can or can't fly, the way the weather is and all these things. And he's like, gee, I wish somebody had told us that ahead of time, and ironically, when I was in Tampa, they were one room over and nobody ever connected us, because it just wasn't considered important, but now it was, especially as they heard that, the mountains were, 20,000 feet and that the weather was horrible and all these things. And so we tell them what we can do. And he goes, well, you guys are going to start doing a UW campaign, which is unconventional warfare. That's where you link up individual operational detachments or ODAs up with factions of the Northern Alliance, which were the allies that we were trying to coordinate with. So it went from there.
So, and I'm glad you brought up the 20,000 feet thing, because I had it in my notes. I wanted to ask you, in the movie, it's depicted that helicopters had never flown that high, and they weren't sure whether or not it could be done. Was that how it actually worked in real life, that you guys didn't know if the altitude was even workable?
Yes and no, but not for the reasons that you might think. So helicopters had flown that high. Chinook helicopters routinely fly at 25,000 feet in Alaska, right over the mountains there. They do the rescue mission at the top of that. I was at Mount McKinley, I think. And so it is possible, but using carrying a usable load, going the distance that we need to go as far as, because we had to trade off fuel for cargo, if you will, people. Right. And so the math didn't work out. And we're wearing supplemental oxygen, or how long is that going to last, per console for the people you got on board. So there's a lot of calculations that have to go into this that, really weren't operationally proven. I operated in Colorado all the time, but that's nothing compared to Afghanistan.
John Harbaugh, head coach of the Ravens, saying there is a 200% chance that Lamar Jackson is back with the Ravens.
Oh, there you go.
OutKick 360 rolls on.
Famous last words. 200%
chance. And that Eric DaCosta, their GM, says we're excited to start up negotiations again with Lamar.
Also sounds like something Jim Harbaugh would say. Right?
Well,
that's a very Jim Harbaugh-like quote.
Yeah.
We are 200% happy to be alive and beat Michigan Wolverines today. I am 200% certain Lamar Jackson, being inside of his brain, I know that he'll be back with the Baltimore Ravens.
Something you don't see often, an NFL player winning an appeal. And we said at the time it was going to be very difficult for the NFL to try to police this. But Cam Jordan, who was fined $50,000 for apparently faking an injury. Remember this story with the Saints? He has won his appeal where he's been vindicated of faking an injury because he was fined, Chad, after he appeared on the team's injury report the following week for the game that they were citing to where he was claiming he was actually hurt, and the NFL fined him. They fined his assistant coach. They fined the organization for this. Cam Jordan wins the appeal. I don't know how you're going to try to police this if you're the league, because I think it's very difficult to prove, especially if the guy, based on the doctors, are putting him on the report the following week. I think it was like a hip or something.
Yeah.
I'm all for cracking down on it. I just don't know how you can find these guys.
Yeah, it was crazy how swift that was too.
Yes.
With that story, I was shocked that they actually went forward and did something like that.
And then the Bucs tried to hurry up and get to the line on fourth down. He went down to the ground, and they were assessed an injury timeout. Right, they gave him a breather, but after that, the Bucs punted anyway. So it's a legitimate reason, very difficult to prove. So I don't know how we see this going down the path of more fines and this happening more often. This happens way more often, though, in the collegiate ranks.
Yes, and it's got to be cleaned up. It's something that's been a huge issue, and everyone violates it at one point or another. But it's got to be cleaned up. Hutton, if today felt like Saturday to me, will tomorrow feel like Sunday? These are the thoughts that float around in my brain.
Maybe.
Does it feel like tomorrow I should be gearing up for watching The Last of Us on HBO on Sunday night and then going back to work the next day? Or do I feel like a break's going to be in order?
As long as tomorrow doesn't feel like a Monday for you, I'm all for it.
I'm going out of town this weekend for a little family reunion up to the mountains. And I feel like I should be in the mountains right now preparing for dinner and then, going to bed early.
Hunting and killing your dinner?
Yes, we'll go out and kill a bear and then bring it back, and I'll skin it and fillet it.
I love how it was
the
bear
grill.
that you're going to have for dinner.
You know what's for dinner tonight,
bear.
kids? Bear. It's a very tough meat, but it's something that you're going to get used to over the years. It's going to be great for everyone involved. The other decisions I have to make is softball coaching is coming back around. Got the big text from the head of our league, and we have now become a keeper league in
that's good.
7-8-year-old softball. I intentionally drafted young, with my daughter being in her first year in the league right out of the bat, thinking that they're going to eventually change their stance and allow you to keep everyone from the year before. They've done that, Hutton. So I feel like my little Red Sox this year had a bit of an advantage over everyone else.
When is this draft?
The evaluations are this weekend, but
you're assigned?
I'm out of town. My two assistant coaches also coach basketball. So my daughter's missing her basketball game this weekend. They're coaching basketball. They're going to somehow split it up. We've been talking about it, where one will be there for half the evaluations. The other one will get there for the second half because of their basketball start times. Here's a quick, not primary complaint, but secondary complaint. We have to do a better job of finding ways for these leagues not to bleed over into each other. Most kids who play baseball or softball also play basketball in the winter. So when you're asking someone to be at evaluations from 9:30 a.m. until 2 p.m. on a Saturday in January, let me tell you something about that Saturday in January. Most of these kids who are participating in team sports are playing a team sport, namely basketball, at the exact same time. These games are in the morning for little kids most of the time. So asking them to be at both is sometimes an impossibility. So you have
for
to
the
acknowledge,
kid and the parent.
You have to acknowledge, it's like playing high school sports at a small town school. You have to acknowledge and respect the other sports, knowing you're going to share athletes amongst the sports. We got to get to a place where that's acknowledged with different leagues. You know,
just wait until you have 2 kids
eye.
playing this schedule.
Well, this is another big topic for another day, but all it does is encourage you.
One sport.
You pick one sport right off the bat, and then you stick with it and play travel ball constantly, which I think sucks.
And it's burnout.
Spread it out.
By the time you get to high school, you're burned out on
No 8-year-old should be playing travel ball. I'm sorry.
Well,
there's a lot of teams that play travel ball at 7, 8, 9 years old. And I'm thinking 11, 12.
Okay.
Maybe if you really want to stick to it full time.
Which would be like, what, 6th, 7th grade?
Right. My daughter does
5th grade.
Does hip-hop dance, tap dance, basketball, piano, softball. Let them do everything. Let the kids play. That's my message in the show. Let Greg Wyshynski join this damn show and let the kids play. This is my message.
Allow
on the way out.
Wyshynski to allow Wyshynski on the show.
Greg Wyshynski should probably unblock me. I'm sure he's done that and join the show.
John McClain will join us tomorrow. Hope you will too. We start at 3 o'clock Eastern on the OutKick Network.